class, I was reading a book on millionaires, some surveys that they'd done, different things like that, just to figure out some of the mindset of them and different things. One thing that doesn't have anything to do with this class that I thought was interesting is most people who become wealthy do not attribute investing in the stock market to have been a contributing factor, right? So if you thought about current economic teaching, they would tell you that a lot of people are getting rich on the stock market and that kind of stuff. But by overwhelming majority, something like 80% to 12% of all millionaires, 80% said that investing in the stock market had little to no impact on their ability to be a millionaire. So the idea is that they were wise investors, but almost all millionaires felt that where they should be investing their money is in their own business and in their own things. Yep.
Is that what that whole 401k thing is?
So 401k is where you put money aside into a tax-free vehicle, so a tax-free account. And most 401ks are either directed or self-directed or somewhere in between. So a directed means that there is someone that works for whatever company that you're working for that takes all of the money from that company's 401k and invests it in certain stocks with the intention of producing a return. And the idea is that you don't pay any tax on that until you cash it out at the end. So it's not tax-free, but it grows tax-free, so that hopefully you have more compounding interest along the way, so that you're not paying taxes as you go. You wait until whatever it is when it's finally done, when you cash it out, and you pay taxes at the end. And so most 401k can be invested in anything. They could invest it in real estate. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but you can apply for a self-directed 401k and become your own 401k administrator and invest it in whatever you want. If you've got a real estate company, you could take your own 401k money, and it still would be 401k, still tax-free, and you could set yourself up as the 401k administrator for your account, and then use your 401k money now while you're not retired to purchase real estate and things like that, if you feel like you could get a better return in using your 401k as that. But you probably would have to have a lawyer to help you set that up, but it's definitely legal to do that. You don't have to have some individual that you don't know be the one that guides your retirement money. But most retirement accounts just go into a 401k, and there's someone from the company that chooses different stocks, and they invest them in. And then a lot of places now have, say, the opportunity where you could either go with their standard investments, or if you want to take your own money and invest in whatever stocks they allow, you can pick and choose what stocks you want yours invested if you want to do it that way. But what a lot of people would teach, or at least the commercials, would have you believe that whether it's your 401k money, which is tax-free, or whether it's just your own savings that you have set aside as a person, that if you put that into the stock market, that there's kind of unlimited potential, and that's how everybody's getting rich, is by investments like that. But what they found is that, like I said, only about 12% of all millionaires felt that the stock market was a significant factor in them becoming a millionaire. And so the rest of them felt that, you got doctors and things that they became because of their education. But most millionaires fall into the entrepreneur category by a large portion. So most people that become millionaires, particularly people that have more than 10 million, what they call decamillionaires, a vast majority of those are people in business. And then of the individual millionaires that don't become decamillionaires, quite a few of them are professionals, lawyers and doctors. But of the people that become decamillionaires, most of them say that what allowed them to get to that place is that instead of investing in somebody else's company through the stock market, they poured all their money into their own business, and then were able to become successful. All right. So, yeah. So a lot of companies, a lot of people view themselves as the single best investment that they can make is to pour their money back into their own kind of company. But then in some of this research, one of the things that applied to this class was that an overwhelming majority of them Also, kind of something maybe that you might not have thought, after being in a few of these classes, you probably would have, but that they attribute the majority of their success to relational skills, not academic skills, right? And so that's kind of what we've been kind of talking about so far in this class. And so I want to talk just a little bit about a few relational skill kind of things. Or, well, let me say it this way. So we've got relational skills, right? And we kind of went over those last week, right? Remember, I kind of gave you the broad categorizations of what falls under social intelligence, emotional intelligence, those types of things, right? And so today what I want to do is not go there. I want to talk about some of the other success factors that are not necessarily just relational, right? So there are relational skill sets that are important for success, right? And so we kind of talked about some of those. At least we introduced those last week. And then today I want to introduce some things that fall under the category of this new emerging science of emotional intelligence, but they're not necessarily relational skills, but they're also very important for success and development. So let me give you one, is being a self-starter. That falls under emotional intelligence, but it's not necessarily how you deal with people, right? This is an emotional factor, right? So this is not academic, right? You can't read this up in a book. I mean, you could read a book that tells you to be a self-starter and then go take a nap, right? That somewhere along the way, this is not your rational thought process may help you with that, but really this is an emotional decision, and it comes from the emotional brain, the willpower to be a self-starter. I mean, because there's a lot of people that know, like if you did a survey that said, is being a self-starter a good idea? You will have an overwhelming majority of people, probably in the 90 percentile, that say, yes, being a self-starter is a good skill. But if you looked at people's lives and saw how many of them apply that, it's probably much lower. So there's a big difference between knowing the right thing and being able to do it, because the doing part of it often is an emotional-based thing that falls under this category of emotional intelligence. So being a self-starter often comes from the emotional skill sets, right? Another one, persistence. So these are huge skills, and these all kind of fall under this broad category of success, right? Which means different things to different people, but some people define it as being content. Some people define it as reaching some goal, but just under the broad category of success, doesn't matter what you define it as, these things help you get there, right? So if it's just being content, very few people are content with being homeless. So there's got to be a certain level of self-starter that reaches you to whatever, even if your definition of content is lower than someone else's, there's still a certain level of achievement that has to get you there. And so self-starter, persistence, it's very hard to achieve genuine success if you always keep stopping and starting things in life. That there is a momentum that comes when you stick with something long enough, right? Devotional life is like this. Any habit, is like that. That you have to persist with it long enough for it to become second nature, right? And if you do something long enough, it becomes a habit. And so, and I think success for some people is a habit, right? They learn the skills of being successful and they repeat them over and over, and then they become very successful, because I think success itself is a habit. That you can choose to have successful behaviors, or you can choose to have unsuccessful behaviors. And there's a reason that the Bible says, take from the one that has, and take it from the one that didn't do anything with what he had. Give it to this other guy that did something with it. And the one that had a little bit is not going to have anything. And the one that has a good amount is going to have even more. And it's not just that Jesus didn't like the guy that didn't have anything, but there is a principle that if somebody has built up something, it's because they have repeatable principles in their life and they have things that they're doing that are right. And so if you want to put your investment in somebody, it's going to be the one that's already doing well, because some of the things that they do are repeatable. And that doesn't always necessarily mean money. That there are skills in life that cause you to be successful that maybe won't necessarily show up in money. And then the other thing is, it depends on when you see someone, right? That almost every person that we look at the end of their life and say, wow, that was somebody that was really successful. There are moments when if you looked at a snapshot in that moment, you would say, man, that poor guy, all kinds of people, right? I was reading something the other day. Winston Churchill was the British Prime Minister during World War II, but his, I want to say, grandfather was originally kind of maybe like an assistant to the king sort of thing, and he would constantly get on the king's kind of bad side when he was younger, because the king was a very fickle king. I mean, in that kind of king culture, if you had a bad king, then the people that worked somewhat close with them, it was like a hit and miss. Sometimes they'd be happy with you, sometimes they wouldn't. And so his grandfather was put in prison by the king because he didn't like something that he did for years. And he said it was during that time that he began to develop his character. And when he was finally released, he ended up being, I think his name was the Duke of Wellington. And when he was released, he ended up leading the army of Britain against France and having victory, and it was what ended up saving their country. But and so that's how Winston Churchill became positioned to be able to have such a position, was because his grandfather was this famous general. But the idea is that if you had looked at his life earlier, he was developing principles that were strong, but if you took it in that snapshot, it might not have looked successful, but the seed was there, right? And so that's the idea, is that we want to have the character seeds that will eventually produce success, whether or not you have your definition of success in the current season, right? Okay. Control of impulse. This is most easily seen in shopping metaphors, but I mean it applies to a whole bunch of other stuff. The reason that when you go to check out, the checkout line is lined with little odds and ends, that it's designed that way because they know that those are things that people respond to on an impulse, right? Ooh, gum, I need that, or yeah.
The women's clothes are always the first thing you run into in the store.
All right.
Middle.
All right.
No matter where you go, you're around women's clothes.
Yeah, just a side note, when they used to design retail stores, they would often put whatever they felt like was the most important stuff immediately to the right, because research shows that something like 70% of customers, when they come in, naturally go to the right, and they will go through the store along that path. And so they actually have ways that they set up, these things that way. But so impulse. So obviously we know what an impulse is, but that doesn't just apply to shopping. It applies to a lot of impulsive behaviors, particularly ones that could eventually become negative, right? And so that's a major part of emotional intelligence, is control of impulse. Delayed gratification. So I always save my best point for last. No, I'm just kidding. I always put my best stuff in week 9, just so that everybody... Delayed gratification, right? And so these are some skills that are emotional, but yet in order to teach them to children, they really have to be emphasized, right? Because this is not just head knowledge. This is emotional-based things, and the emotional brain learns by experience. The emotional brain learns by repetition, things like that. It's not just head knowledge. That's why you could tell your teenager, oh, save some money, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do it. There's often, the better way is to make them somehow at a young age. You know what I'm saying? Like you set up a system where they are doing it whether they want to or not. and then it begins to get more embedded in their emotional brain, because their emotional brain is a repetitious, experience-based part of their mind, right? And so, and it's one, the emotional brain, it takes a little longer to get it in there, but once it's in there, it's more repeatable, right? It's not like some rational things where you may forget a statistic or something like that down the road. 10 years later, you may not remember what percentage of a particular thing happened that I was talking about. So some things in the rational brain don't necessarily stick. Things in the emotional brain stick very well. I don't know if we talked about that, but there are actual chemicals that are released in the emotional brain that are what regulate whether memories stick or not, right? And so, and it's designed to be that way. I guess the Lord wanted it that way so that highly emotional events get remembered, right? And so the emotional brain, when it's triggered, actually sends out certain chemicals that signal to the other parts of your brain, remember this. So that's why you can remember where you were when September 11th happened or something like that, because it was such an emotional thing that those chemicals are released and it signals to your brain, remember this, it's an important activity, right?
What if, though, that on that same line that you were just saying,
Mm-hmm.
people tend to always remember the negative over the positive.
Okay. And that's true. And in fact, we may even touch on some of that in a little bit, because negative emotions are more powerful than positive emotions for whatever reason. They leave a more of an impact. And so if you're coaching, mentoring, any of that kind of stuff, you have to be sure that you are, it could take 8 or 9 positive things to balance out one negative thing, because for whatever reason, negative emotions, the way that they're embedded in the brain, are much more powerful than positive things. So that's why, at a church, the senior pastor does good for 10 years, and then he does one thing, and people have a hard time forgetting that. You know what I'm saying? Even though in the back of your mind you had to know he wasn't perfect to begin with, but if he does something, people have a hard time forgetting that, because negative emotions trigger in the brain. And could it be that God wanted people to, either it's part of the curse and God didn't necessarily want that from the beginning, or it's something God embedded so that things that we should stay away from tend to embed in us more strongly. So something that we shouldn't do, some kind of sin, some kind of thing like that that's negative, stands out to us more clearly so that we will avoid it more effectively,
Because kids do that, I know I did growing up, but I guess when you remember when you did this, but it was always on the negative side.
Right.
My own boys have done that, in just joking around. But
Right.
I remember the time you said this, and it's
Right.
always on the negative tone where it's, well, don't you remember, when
Right.
I said this? No.
Or if someone is abused
Yeah.
or even picked on at a young age from other kids, even if it's not severe. You know how people, like middle school is like, hormone city, and so people are unstable as it is anyways at that age. And so somebody picks on somebody, and man, it gets embedded. And that can affect their life. I mean, one bad day in middle school can affect how they see themselves, because negative emotions are very powerful. And in fact, I may, I'll just throw this out there. I'm gonna get into it a little bit more, but research, there was a research program that was done where they brought students at a university in for coaching, right? So for mentoring, for coaching, that kind of thing. They wanted to encourage them. And so, but it was really just a test, it was kind of a research thing. And so what they did was, one group of students, their coaches asked them a question that was intended to be positive, right? And the question that they asked them was, in 10 years after you graduate, how do you see yourself in success? What is success going to mean? If you are successful 10 years from now, what does that mean? And so that's how the coach guided them on the positive side. The group that was on the negative side, what the coach asked them was not necessarily what you would consider negative. It wasn't like beating them or any of that kind of stuff. He was just simply, and it's kind of interesting how easily the negative system, remember we talked about that there's the fight or flight system, but then there's also the parasympathetic system, and we have the two going at the same time. Whenever we have positive interactions, our parasympathetic system comes in and it causes us to be loving and peaceful and gentle. But when we have negative interactions, all of a sudden the other system kicks in, and that's a totally different set of hormones than what we're used to with the other one. And so they're opposite systems. And so in order to trigger the other one, this is what they said. They asked them, how are you doing on your homework? Did you finish your assignment yet? How about the textbook? Did you finish? And you would think those are just coaches trying to care. I mean, it's important things that they needed to do. Yeah, so I'm not going to ask you. I don't even want to know. I don't want to trigger my own negative impulses. Just kidding. And so, but the idea was that that's all it took to get them to enter into their negative system, was to begin asking them things. Well, did you finish your homework yet? Did you do that? And so you can see how a well-meaning coach might actually be triggering negative reactions in people, and they don't even mean to. Whereas someone that is more visionary and getting them to open up that part of their brain. And so it's just kind of interesting how easily we can trip somebody's negative reactions and not even realize it. And so, and the reason that that was negative is this word right here. It triggers guilt. And guilt is one of the key triggers for the negative system in human relationships. Now, I happen to be in a unique position where I've had quite a bit of experience with this, because my two jobs of pastor and teacher are both jobs where you trigger a lot of guilt in people, whether you mean to or not. Just wanting to check on people to see how they're doing their homework. If they've totally given up and you're just checking in with them, well-meaning, by the way, you know what I'm saying? I'm not checking in with you because I get any thrill out of you turning in homework. If I'm checking in with you, it's because I care about you. But it still triggers guilt, right? And as a pastor, when you preach about things, there is a tendency, if somebody's not living right, to feel guilty, you know? And so I've seen this quite a bit, and the effect that guilt begins to have on relationships. I've seen, as a pastor, if somebody's living in sin, one of the first things that begins to happen, and I know this doesn't apply to you guys, they will start sitting in the back, and they will little by little start going to the back. That doesn't mean that everybody that sits in the back is sinful. I have noticed, it's not you guys, I promise.
We're sitting in the back.
Yeah, but I have noticed that in the youth program, if a kid was living right, they would often be up close, they'd want to be engaged, they'd want to be involved. But I would notice if they start hanging out with people that they shouldn't, which means that probably in their personal life they're doing some things that have triggered this, then little by little, their physical demeanor starts to tell the tale. And they start to disengage both mentally, spiritually, and physically. And they begin to be in the back. They don't want to be around the front, that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, my relationship with this student is hindered, not because I have anything against them, but guilt causes this student to think that I have something against them. You understand what I'm saying? Guilt will put a wedge between you and someone else, and they will not even be able to define it. They just feel like they can't be around you anymore, right? And it's the seed of guilt, and I've seen it happen many times. It's happened in the school. There's been plenty of people that I had, because I happen to have good relationships with most of the people, and particularly when we founded the school, almost everyone in the original cohort there were people that I had a personal relationship with. And when they would stop doing their homework, it was not long before they would quit talking to me as an individual. And little by little, my relationship with them would deteriorate, and who knows how they viewed it. You know, they might blame it on me. They might see it in themselves. They might not. Most of the time, they don't see it in themselves. And little by little, I would lose people out of friendships. And it would begin. I could go back and tell you the assignment that they missed that started the downfall. And what it is it's a system of guilt. That when they know that they should be doing something and then they're not, it is the position that I have that creates a certain level of guilt. And the guilt then begins to deteriorate the relationship. And little by little, someone that knows they should be doing better but doesn't will eventually let that spill over into the relationship, and the relationship eventually erodes to the point when it's not there anymore. And it is the seed of guilt. And so the reason that is important is because if you're going to coach and you're going to be a leader, right, within your organization, you have to be careful about this. That as a pastor and as a teacher, there's not much way around it. You know, you got to preach, and there's going to be people that are not living right, that have guilt, and you got to have standards in the school, and there's going to be certain people that for whatever reason quit doing it, and then the seed of guilt begins. And so there's not a way around that. But in leading, say, a business, or being even in your family, different places where you're called to be a leader, you have to watch this because, like from that example, you can trigger it without even realizing it. That you can just be trying to hold them to a high standard and be producing more of the negative system within them as opposed to the positive system. Now, the idea is that you do need both. You can't just let somebody go through life and not hit their standards and not hold them accountable. If they mess up, you got to let them know. But, as you alluded to, and what caused me to think of this, is it is often you need a whole lot more of the positive to balance the negative, right? And if you don't, then you will destroy the relationship after a while. And so there has to be more